morning and welcome to Common Sense Institute and welcome to Eggs and Economy. We're getting a little bit slow start, but that's okay because we're right here at the beginning of the summertime. My name is Cinnamon Watson and I'm the CEO of Common Sense Institute, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all here today. If this is your first time at CSI, we're especially grateful for the opportunity to welcome you to our quarterly breakfast series, where we bring together voices from across the state to dig into CSI's research and the issues that are impacting you the most. And that's our mission, to examine the fiscal impacts of policies and educate voters on those issues. How do we do it? Our gifted team of economists and bipartisan policy fellows provide facts on the most pressing issues of the day. We employ rigorous research techniques and dynamic modeling to evaluate the potential impact of these measures on the Colorado economy and individual opportunity. The infrastructure of technical expertise that we have built at CSI gives us the ability to reach policymakers and voters with clear, detailed analysis and really describe the impact of what laws actually mean to the real world. And coincidentally, we find ourselves in an election year that it is especially important to take those analysis into account. Now in our 16th year, CSI is leading with the facts and leading with data, producing research, hard evidence, and sound analysis focused on issues ranging from education, healthcare, energy, and everything in between. In other words, we're chronicling the good and the bad about Colorado's economy and providing just the facts. And already this year, we've issued 35 different reports on a wide range of topics. And finally, we measure our success with impact at the ballot box, and impact in the halls of government. The list of CSI successes is long. For instance, in 2023, CSI's work on property taxes led to the defeat of one of the largest tax increases in the history of the state. And then again in 2024 and 2025, CSI helped voters navigate extremely long ballots with everything from banning slaughterhouses to big cat hunting to increasing funding for law enforcement. And in the 2026 session, just weeks ago, CSI researchers examined the state budget, informed policymakers on skyrocketing growth of Medicaid, and produced analysis on the shifting demographics in Colorado. But before we begin today's program, I'd like to recognize and thank the members of our board of directors. These men and women represent the diversity of Colorado's economy and are really at the heart of our mission. Thank you all for being here. I know we have several in the audience today. I also want to recognize our policy fellows. Our work would not be possible without these fellows. They bring a wealth of expertise and insight to CSI's research, and I often call them our secret sauce, but one of our researchers corrected me yesterday and said they're not really a secret anymore, Cinnamon. So thank you to all of our policy fellows who are here today. And then today is also day 2 for our 2026 class of junior fellows. You can see everyone around the room. They are college students from across the country, and they are jumping feet first into our research and our mission. And if you have a second to introduce yourself, please do so. They are eager to learn, and their enthusiasm will definitely make your day. Our junior fellows give us faith in a new generation of leaders, and we are grateful for their time here this summer. I also wanted to thank the Daniels Fund for their partnership on this really important program. It's such an asset to our organization. I would now like to welcome our newest policy fellow to the podium, the Honorable Paul Lundeen. He serves as CSI's Energy Policy Fellow, and most recently he served as the Senate Minority Leader. He's a statesman, a skilled legislator, and a policy expert, and lucky for us, he has a wealth of experience on energy policy.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. How y'all doing today? That's great. Well, I'm so very pleased to now be, as Cinnamon just said, a part of the team here at the Common Sense Institute. My role as an energy fellow here at CSI is born out of my experience as a policymaker who is familiar with the legislative process and the influence it may exert on the economic realities of Colorado. In the recent past, Colorado has enacted some of the nation's most aggressive carbon emission reduction laws. Research shows these laws have cost the state $18.3 billion in GDP in their cumulative effect, and roughly 1% of its employment base. Since 2019, the state has enacted 73 new bills and regulations aimed at environmental goals through energy production. These facts tie into the broader context around the legislative session as we ask here at CSI, how might state policies be compromising the kind of growth Colorado experienced in the 2010s? Some of us in this room, I think maybe everyone in this room, except some of the junior fellows there, are old enough to remember the 2010s. And we look forward to understanding how the state can kickstart similar economic vitality again. Today is about the legislative session. Sine Die is the name of the gathering we have here today. Lawmakers battled a budget shortfall from the opening day and tackled everything from human trafficking to retail theft to the challenges of understanding the application of TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. CSI also had a very busy legislative session, providing the facts on many policy areas. One of the areas where CSI made an impact involved the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing's spending growth over the last 10 years. CSI found that HCPF spending has nearly doubled, outpacing the growth of all other government spending, significantly outpacing the growth of both population and inflation here in Colorado. Another area where CSI's work was discussed was in the committee conversations around a number of issues, but specifically the mortgage mismatch study that CSI did. The study found it now takes twice as many hours of work to afford the average mortgage compared to the early 2010s. In addition, CSI researched the human trafficking penalties in Colorado. This report found that in 2024, the state had the nation's 13th highest number of human trafficking offenses. The bill's sponsors referred to our research, which found Colorado has higher than average rates of human trafficking. Toward the end of the session, CSI analyzed the potential impacts of House Bill 26-1430. This bill preemptively attacked an upcoming ballot initiative that would require the state to spend its transportation funding on roads and bridges. In effect, the bill would have meant $0 in new road revenue until the end of the decade. These bills are important in the broader context of Colorado's business climate. Simply put, this is no longer the booming business ecosystem of the prior decade. Colorado now has one of the nation's worst rates of business establishment. In May, CSI researchers analyzed Bureau of Labor statistical data on business births and business deaths. So some background in understanding this. A business establishment birth is any new business establishment in Colorado, whether it moved here or was started by a longtime Coloradan. A business death is any time a business establishment is no longer existing in Colorado. This could mean it moved somewhere else, closed, or voluntarily, or was forced to close. And here's the cut to the chase data. In 2024, Colorado had 28,121 business establishment births, significant number. But in that same year, the study shows 32,055 business establishment deaths. That means Colorado had a net loss of a total of 3,934 business establishments. Colorado was one of only 6 states that saw both a net loss of business establishments and a net loss of employment associated with those losses. Most states and the United States as a whole gained both business establishments, and jobs. Now, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's panel discussion, the main event. Get back up here, Dustin. Dustin Zvonek, CSI's Homelessness Policy Fellow. Dustin has an expansive background in leadership and management. He's a former small business owner, bank and nonprofit executive, and has worked across many levels of government. He previously served as an at-large member and mayor pro tem of the Aurora City Council. Among other previous roles, he served as the president and CEO of the Young Americans Bank and Young Americans Center for Financial Education. In addition, he served as a district and communications director for a member of the United States Congress and as a policy director for the Colorado State Minority Leader. And you take one look at the guy and you realize he is in fact also an elite athlete. Dustin, the floor is yours.
The only thing that Senator Lundeen missed from my bio was I'm also the president of his fan club. Miss having somebody like him down at the Capitol. So look, thank you, Senator, and everybody for being here this morning. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel. The legislative session, which recently wrapped up, is where Colorado's most pressing policy issues are analyzed and debated. But this session here today is to recap what all of that means for Colorado's economy. So I'm excited to introduce our two panelists. I'm going to start with Representative Caldwell. Colorado State Representative Jarvis Caldwell, a 10-year Air Force veteran representing House District 20, offers a perspective grounded in military service, community leadership, and advocacy for Colorado families. He now serves as the House Minority Leader. Representative Caldwell has been a strong voice on public safety, school choice, parental rights, and policies aimed at addressing Colorado's fentanyl crisis and broader community challenges. Help me welcome Representative Caldwell to the stage.
You want me to just go take a seat?
Yeah, grab it. Pick a seat. You get to choose. Oh, look at that. So you're first up. Next up, Colorado State Senator Kyle Mullica brings a unique perspective shaped by public service, healthcare, and firsthand experience with the challenges many Colorado's families face. From serving Adams County at the Capitol to working shifts as an emergency department nurse, Senator Mullica remains dedicated to improving the lives of Coloradans. Senator Mullica now serves as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and is a member of the Finance and Transportation and Energy Committees. Help me welcome him to the stage. All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to go back and forth with some questions are going to be for both of them. Some of them will be for them individually, and we're going to start off with a question aimed at both of you. So each of you have held leadership roles within your caucus and your parties, and in a session that was marked by major fiscal constraint and some high-profile disagreements, where have you found genuine common ground this year, and what made those areas possible when so much else remained divided? Representative, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can kick us off. First off, everybody can hear me, right? This is new to me. The pastor mic here. First off, thank you for having me, and thank you to the Common Sense Institute. As kind of mentioned at the beginning there, we use Common Sense's research a ton when we're out there and we're having conversations in committees and from the House floor. It is great work that we really rely heavily on. This was my first session as the House Minority Leader, and coming in, I'm also a freshman legislator as well, and I'm in my first term, and so it's an interesting thing to try to navigate, and you're trying to manage the things within your caucus, but you're also having to work across the aisle, and from the minority's perspective, the reality is there's 43 Democrats and there's 22 Republicans, and so if you want to get something done, you have to work across the aisle, right? I'm not there to just try to roadblock everything and pound my fist on the desk. I want to actually get good things done for Coloradans, and that's why I ran for office, and I hope that's why everybody ran for office. And so looking where we can find agreements on, and we've Common Sense has done great work on covering the business regulatory climate, They've covered crime in Colorado, and we found some agreements there. We had a great rule regulatory bill that I was proud to be a prime sponsor on that we got passed. We cracked down on child sex trafficking and increased some penalties there. We found some agreements, bipartisan agreements on some of our energy policies, specifically down in Colorado Springs with the Ray Nixon coal plant that was going to be forced to be closed in 2029, which was going to absolutely drive up rates and run a serious risk of rolling blackouts in Colorado Springs because, frankly, we just didn't have a replacement in time, and we were able to get the life of that plant extended. So, reaching across the aisle and finding, like, what are the pressing issues. I think there was a lot of appetite to find the things that we could come together on, given that, this is, you have a governor who's in his last year in office, a Speaker of the House, a Majority Leader, who were all on their way out. And so they were looking to try to, find some agreements on some things on their way out.
Thank you, Dustin. Can you guys hear me? Perfect. Well, before I get started, I see some familiar faces in the audience and that I get to serve with at the Capitol. Senator Carson and Senator Frizzell are here, and two of the best on the other side of the aisle that we were able to serve, at least for a time, on Senate Health, Senator Carson, but serve on the Health Committee. And so good to see both of you. I saw Linda and Don here, and whenever I see Linda, I can't help but say thank you. The Daniels Fund changed my life. I wouldn't be sitting up here without them as a Daniels scholar, and so and Linda played a huge role in that. And so and then Marcus Catlin's here as well, and we get to work with his dad. And so sorry, I had to do my shout outs to everyone I saw, but super excited to be here at CSI, and I think that it's a great question because I think a lot of the media and a lot of the things everyone sees are the disagreements, but there's a lot of things that happen in that building where we agree. And I think that the baseline that I operate in, and I know the Minority Leader in the House operates in, is that even when we disagree, we're all still coming from this in the same place, that we want what's best for Colorado. Sometimes we may disagree on how to get there, but when you can come to the table with that mindset, conversations are a lot easier to have. Without having to start in basically a negative space. The Minority Leader mentioned the bill around child sex trafficking, which is just common sense, and it was a really good thing to see this year, to see that get over the finish line with bipartisan support. The School Finance Act, I think there's some broad bipartisan support on our school funding here in the state, and that we need to do a better job at that. The thing that sticks out to me, though, from a healthcare perspective in the Senate is I'm not sure if I've seen such bipartisan support as when it came to holding the executive director of HCPF accountable. We were able to make some big changes this year and really make sure that we were holding folks accountable, and that came from both sides of the aisle, and that wouldn't have happened without that. And so that was something that I saw this year that I think was a good thing, and I think that Republicans and Democrats coming together did something positive for the people of Colorado, and making sure that that program starts being ran better and that there's some accountability.
Great. I'm going to go. This one is going to be specifically for you, Senator Mullica. So Colorado Democrats, your party came into this 2026 session with a bold policy agenda, but the reoccurring budget shortfalls limited what you could realistically move. How much did the state's fiscal reality make Democrats rethink priorities this year? And what does that tell us about the long-term structure of Colorado's budget challenges?
Yeah, I think it affected not just Democrats. I think it affected every single person in that building on legislation that you were running. Obviously, with the budget constraints that we had, if your bill had a fiscal note, it was going to have a really difficult path forward. And look, I think that's really hard, but I think it's a good thing too, that we need to make sure that we are looking at everything with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that the policies that we're passing are the best policies for the people of Colorado and doing the most good. I think that we have a lot of conversations to have in this state when it comes to Tabor, when it comes to how our budget operates and making sure that we as elected officials have the tools to do the best good for the people of Colorado. But I also am a big proponent of, in that building, that we should be pressure testing legislation. We shouldn't be rubber stamping anything. And I think that, I'll speak for the Senate, I won't speak for the House, but I do think that we do a pretty good job of that in the Senate. Again, that's not a partisan thing, because that takes both sides of the aisle to be able to really pressure test pieces of legislation. But we do a good job, and I think the budget adds another layer of that test.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The House is an unruly bunch. We get 65 of them over there. Let's stick with another budget question. So Colorado has, this is for you, Representative Caldwell. Colorado has faced significant budget shortfalls in consecutive years. Is there bipartisan agreement on what's driving the problem, whether it be Medicaid growth or structural labor constraints, economic slowdown, spending, and where do the parties still seem to fundamentally disagree on what is driving the long-term shortfalls?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's agreement that there's a problem with the budget, but I think you do see some disagreements, and again, I'll speak for the House side based on my conversations I have with my colleagues across the aisle. The Joint Budget Committee, the nonpartisan staff there, they'd been warning us. There's memos going back, I think, to as early as 2020, 2021, talking about a structural deficit and warning. Those early memos, they were saying, hey, we're creating an atmosphere. I can't remember the exact language, but they were trying to warn the legislature, like, we're putting ourselves where we're creating this structural deficit. Now, if you look at kind of the most recent memos they've written in the last couple of years, they've said, well, we're not creating it anymore. We've created it. And, we saw it in 2025 with the $1.2 billion budget deficit. We had another $1 billion budget deficit this year. When I talked to my Joint Budget Committee members member Rick Taggart about what is next year looking like, I think on the low side we're looking at, I believe, at least $700 million budget shortfall going into next year as well. And again, I think that's on the low side. And so, from our perspective, we keep emphasizing, hey, we're in a structural deficit. We need to fix this. We did do cutting in certain areas this year. However, the budget we passed is a record-sized budget, $46.8 billion. And when I look at the budget overall, again, as a freshman legislator, and I go, okay, in 2019, the state budget was $29 billion. The budget we passed this year was $46.8 billion. The budget has increased around 60% based on those numbers. Now, that's obviously the budget as a whole, not just the general fund. And so, from our perspective, we're saying, okay, like, we need to actually try to rein in some of the spending. Every single year, we're doing massive record budgets. It doesn't seem like we're ever actually cutting anywhere where we might need. When we talk about Medicaid, and we're saying, okay, well, enrollment is basically flat, but it's increased 100% in the last several years. And so, looking to policy decisions, what we can do to change that. So I think there's agreements in certain areas, and with HICPUF was mentioned, I think you find some agreements there. But overall, I think, at least in the House side, there's a lot of talk about the federal government and H.R. 1 and Tabors, why we can't have nice things, which obviously we always vehemently disagree with that, and we say it is why we can have nice things. So there's definitely some big disagreements there that I think we'll continue to see play out over the next few sessions, and probably ever.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that number, that 700-ish million that you're talking about as a potential shortfall, that does not take into account some of the policy changes that could happen this November, right? If voters, depending on, there's a number of ballot measures, I know that Cinnamon mentioned them earlier. A number of them would have significant impacts on the budget, both adding revenue or subtracting revenue to the state. And so there'll have to be a whole new assessment, come the end of the year on what the gap could potentially look like.
Sure.
Let me jump back to you, Senator Mullica, and you touched on this as a place where there was some bipartisan agreement, but the departure of the executive director at Colorado's Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing raised questions about the management inside of one of the state's largest agencies. Do you see that change primarily as acknowledgement of overspending, or is it more of a management accountability issue within the department?
Yeah, I think it's probably both. I think that there was some really poor management of the department, and I think that the state of Colorado got the short end of the stick when it came to that, it happened for a number of years, and so I think we finally hit a boiling point, and we were able to utilize tools that we had in our toolbox to hold that department and that director accountable. And look, I think that when it's not a partisan issue, when you have fraud, waste, and abuse, it's our job as elected officials to stand up and say, no, that's not all right, it's not enough. We're not going to stand for that. And you saw that, and that director is no longer leading that department. I also think that we have a lot of issues with that department in regards to how do we best utilize the dollars that we have? How do we maximize those? These dollars are supposed to be helping the most vulnerable people in our state, making sure that they have health care. And I think that when we see on how some of them are spent and how that department is operated sometimes, there's a lot to be questioned. A lot of what I look at, is we got a lot of money in from ARPA. We got billions of dollars into our state, and we started a lot of programs. I'm not sure if we have a lot to show from that, though. We have a lot of duplicative services being offered, and I think on their surface, they're great. For example, the Behavioral Health Administration, that sounds great. We all want to be investing in behavioral health, but when you start digging in, there's a lot of duplicative things that we're spending dollars on. I think that when we do talk about it, I think, there is an impact that's coming down from HR 1. We do have an impact, and we can agree or disagree, but there is an impact, and we're having to navigate that as well. And so there's multiple fronts that we're battling. One thing I am really excited for, Senator Frizzell is on this, but we have created, JBC ran a bill this year to create a Medicaid commission so that we can start digging in and really figuring out what are the driving forces to having us in a position where Medicaid now takes up a third of our state budget. And how do we start getting some of these costs under control? How do we start making sure that those dollars are being spent to the best of their ability? How do we make sure, this is another problem that happened with HICPUF that really irked me, was how do we make sure that we are maximizing the dollars coming in from the federal government into our state? When we're not doing that, those are dollars that we're leaving on the table that could be helping the people of Colorado. And so that's another thing that we'll be looking at. But I think that the first step was obviously a change in management, and I think now we're starting to dig in and really figure out policies that we can do to make sure that department and that program are running to the best of their ability and having the best impacts as possible.
This next question is going to be, again, aimed at both of you. So I'll let you take the first crack, Representative. One of the more notable bipartisan bills this year was the regulatory review measure requiring state agencies to review regulations every 5 years and eliminated outdated or duplicative rules. The bill passed with broad support. What does this say about the legislature's current view of Colorado's regulatory climate and concerns the business community have been raising?
Yeah. So I was proud to be a sponsor of that bill with the Speaker of the House over on the House side. And, we've just continually heard from the business community, and I think we've all probably been familiar with the statistic that we're the 6th most regulated state in the nation. And something I always say is, after when I'm going down, I'm speaking on a bill that's another regulation, I'll say, after this session, we may be the 5th. And so just trying to emphasize constantly that we are the 6th most regulated state in the nation, and every year we come back in January and 600 to 700 more bills from January to May, and a lot of those are regulations. And so, we have around, I think, 205,000 regulations, business regulations on the books, and it's estimated, I believe it was it's either 40% or 60% are duplicative or excessive. And so the Senate Bill 137, I believe was the number on it, basically kind of reins that in, because departments already had to go through and review their regulations, but there wasn't like a strict, tight time frame. And this bill changes that and put that at a 5-year mark. And then there were also a lot of other aspects to it that had to do with giving the legislature the ability to put forward in Smart Act hearings fixes and changes. So I think that was really important, and that was born from the business community. They were just coming to us and saying, guys, like, we're struggling, we are underwater right now, like, we need some help, we need to rein some of this in. And so I think you did see that broad bipartisan support. I believe on the Senate side, Senator Minority Leader Cleve Simpson was on it, and as well as President Coleman. So, you know, anytime you see the leadership in both chambers be on a bill, that is, I think the purpose of that is sending a message saying this is a top priority that we have right now. And again, that was born from the business community. And I know we certainly used Common Sense's a lot of their studies to kind of speak on that bill and you know, advocate for it.
Yeah, and I won't add too much more, but I agree with the minority leader that you know, I think, you know, shows that the business community's voice does matter, that the legislature is listening, and I think the policy is a good policy. We should be looking at things. Times change, and we should be making sure that the policies that we have on the books are being effective, are working, are doing what the intent was. I ran a bill with Senator Doherty doing something similar for healthcare this year to try to break down some of the bureaucracy in healthcare and the duplicative policies that we have in place when it comes to how our hospitals are managed here in the state. And so I think it's a good thing, and I think it's something that we should be doing across the board, making sure that the laws that we have on the books are working and doing what we wanted them to do.
Yeah, it seems to me that the business community would probably like it if our state ranking for regulations wasn't treated like a golf score. We're not at a race to 1, it should be a race to 50. So this seems like a common sense step in the right direction. So another question to both of you, and we'll let you start with this one, Senator. Colorado's population growth has slowed significantly from the boom years of the 2010s, particularly domestic migration. To what extent do you think state policy, things like taxes, regulation, housing, labor laws have all contributed to this shift, and what do you think lawmakers could do to restore Colorado's competitiveness?
Yeah, I think, you know, probably the answer that some people would want me to give is that there was an impact, but there is. I think that, you know, I'm not here to blow smoke. I think that as elected officials, we have to get better at saying, hey, what we did maybe didn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board. And I don't think that the policies that we've passed always are the best policies, or always maybe have the intent that we hoped for. You know, and so I do think that there's been impact. I think that when it comes to the biggest issue, though, I think Colorado has become extremely unaffordable. You know, now, do I think that's all the Democrats' fault? I don't. I think that there's a lot at play in what has made Colorado unaffordable, but we can always be doing better. I think regulations are one of those things. How do we break down some of those barriers to make sure that affordable housing can be built? But we also are trying. You know, Representative Byrd, before she left the legislature, spent a lot of time on construction defects. You know, and what can we do there? And so I think that, you know, the legislature and the policy that we've passed has definitely played a role. To what extent, that's probably debatable, but no matter what extent it is, we should always be looking at that and figuring out how do we make life better for the people of Colorado, how do we make this a place that people want to move? And I think it is. I think that we just always should be having that at the forefront of our mind in the policy that we're passing.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado, it's not hard to convince people, you know, to come here. When I meet with site selectors and businesses who are looking to expand here in Colorado, they're like, we love Colorado. Like, who doesn't want to live here with the beautiful mountains and all the activities you can do? We have a very educated workforce. We have just great people in general. But it is the issues like cost of living. I believe the most recent study was we're the number 3 state in cost of living. I think we're, or number, I guess, 48th technically in cost of living, and 47th or 48th in housing affordability. Again, 6th most regulated. We're ranked in a lot of things that make it really hard for people to survive here, especially if you're young. I always tell people, I graduated high school in 2007. Everybody in this room, except maybe some of the younger fellows that were mentioned earlier, remember between 2007 and 2009, when we had the Great Recession, it was a hard time to survive in 2007 coming out of high school, which probably is a factor that helped lead me to joining the military, because it was a good steady pay at the time. But I look at young people now who are graduating high school and going out into this economy, and I go, oh man, with inflation and housing unaffordability and everything, I go, to me it's harder now, even though we don't call this a Great Recession. It seems harder now to try to survive as a young person in Colorado than what it was as a young person. And I was in Florida at the time in 2007, 2008. So I had a line in my opening day speech, and I said it got a lot of attention. Ed Sealover loved it, by the way, and I think tweeted it out. But I said I've noticed that the more bills that we pass in the name of affordability, the less affordable Colorado becomes. And thank you, I heard a clap there. But yeah, so that got some really good attention. And I do think this is where a kind of a fundamental disagreement between the minority and the majority are. Is I don't view passing more bills and more regulations as to make things better. I think we actually need to be rolling back the government. I think we're too bloated. Since 2019, I believe we've added around 6,000 to 7,000 state employees. We've added multiple departments, tens of thousands of regulations, and I don't think it has created a great climate for businesses to thrive, for people to thrive. And so I think that is where you kind of have that fundamental disconnect or disagreement between the two parties. I think we're trying to do too much to fix the problem, and I think that's making the problem worse. And so I want to get back to like the regulatory review bill that we did have bipartisan agreement on. I want to start rolling some things back here and letting the economy thrive. Something I always bring up is, when we want to disincentivize something, what does the government do? Let's say, we want less people to smoke, right? We do a sin tax. We make it more expensive for people to use that, and that is intended to disincentivize it. And so I'm like, well, what are we doing to businesses when we pass more and more regulations, and making it more expensive to have a business here? We are, in my opinion, disincentivizing businesses to start up and thrive here. And so again, I think, in my opinion, government is the problem. I think we need to do less, frankly, and I think we'll see some of those numbers change.
Next question for both of you, and again, I'll start with you, Senator. The legislature is passing substantially more bills than it did a decade ago, and many of them are increasingly complex and expansive. Why do you think the General Assembly has become more active, and do you worry about the volume of legislation itself is creating uncertainty for families, employers, and local governments?
Yeah, I don't have an answer of why per se, but it is a significant number of bills. And I think that when we look at the Senate, just with the makeup of the Senate, I think with how it's supposed to operate, we do, like I said earlier, pressure test these bills. We do look at them. I think that the interesting thing too, and I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but the both chambers are relatively close to a supermajority for the Democrats. Now, is that reflective of the state? I would probably argue it's not, actually. But I think that there's certain politics probably at play that have us in that position, whether it's the state politics or federal politics that have us in that position. And I think that leads to a certain environment as well. How did I put this a couple days ago when I was talking about this? You don't necessarily have the level of accountability as when the margins are tighter, in that building. And I think that leads to a certain environment within that building. And I think I think no matter what side you're on, I think that those margins being tighter are probably a good thing for Colorado. And so I'm not sure if that plays a role in where we're at. But I definitely, in my 8 years at the Capitol, I've seen that shift a little bit, and my hopes are that we can get back to that where we're having it. I think that even with those numbers in the Senate, I can speak for myself as one of the Democrats. I work really hard to try to get that input from the other side, and I think that that's how we should be operating and taking in different perspectives. But yeah, I think that a lot of what you're talking about with the number of bills, kind of where they're coming from, probably has to do with just the temperature of the building and where we're at politically because of the margins that we have. That's just my opinion, I guess.
Yeah, I'm one to complain about how many bills there are every session, and actually one of my members in the House actually ran a bill to try to limit the number. So I think probably everybody in the room knows that we're allotted 5 bills that we can originate. Now, many of us end up being on more bills than 5 because you're obviously joining on and sponsoring someone else's bill. I try to practice what I preach, so I complain there's too many bills. I think I only originated 2 bills of my 5 this year. Now, I was on more because I joined on with some of my colleagues across the aisle. But I do try to practice what I preach. So I think I only originated 2 in my first year, my first session last year. I think I used 3 of the 5. In the interim last year, I think this was before I became minority leader. I could be wrong about that. But in the interim last year, I attended the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce's Site Selectors event, which if you've never been a part of, if you get an invite, do it. It's pretty amazing because what you're doing is interacting with representatives from these usually multinational companies who are going all around the country, and they're looking at different states and locations to see if they want to expand their businesses there. And so I think I was the only legislator that actually stayed for 2 days with the event. And I do what I do. I don't know if there's any whiskey drinkers in here. I see Senator Lundeen over there. I know he enjoys a nice glass. We like to have a good glass of whiskey together, and we appreciate that and have that in common. But I did a 2 days of the event, and I think Senator Mullica, I think you were there for one of the days as well. But so I stayed the night. We were in Denver, and I was having a glass of whiskey with some of these site selectors, and they tend to open up because it's a little obviously less formal, and that's really you really get the true opinions. And the number one concern that I heard from them was it is hard to long-term plan here in Colorado because they're looking at 10, 20 years from now. If you're going to come here and you're going to build a $1 billion facility, you need to have some confidence that the next time we come back in session in January, we're not going to pass some kind of regulation that is going to basically make it unfeasible for your business. Now, we've seen it here with a certain nicotine company that is building a big facility here. Well, towards the end of session this year, we heard that there's going to be a tax on nicotine potentially, and and it's like, well, the other business community, the other businesses looking to expand here, they see that, they talk, and they go, hey, look, if we come here, we don't know what's going to happen in January if we start breaking ground. And that was one of their biggest concerns is just an unstable regulatory or legislative environment. And a big part of that is because of I think the makeup of the legislature. When you have a split chamber, then it really forces that bipartisan working across the aisle there when you have those split chambers. But now, I also, as a member of the minority, I have to look in the mirror and say, well, okay, why are we in the minority? What am I doing wrong as a leader within the Republican Party? How do I reach out and convince voters that hey, we have good ideas too, and that if you give us a chance and you elect more of my members and you bring that balance back, how will that benefit you in your life? So this is not all. I never come from it from a perspective of just pointing and saying oh, look at the Democrats, because I go, well, look, the voters have elected the majority party to be in control, and so what can I do as a Republican to instill that confidence and bring that balance back?
I think Representative Caldwell may have just created or suggested a really good opportunity for CSI's fellows around the cap of bills, right? Because it is supposed to be, the 5 is supposed to be the ceiling, not the floor, although it's treated like the floor. And so one of the questions might be, look, there's other states that don't have a cap at all. And do you actually see fewer bills because there's not this pressure to get to 5? I mean, again, great question to be asked or answered by one of these young fellows. I'm going to go back to you, Representative Caldwell, for a specific question. Many business leaders say Colorado feels less predictable, as you just mentioned, than it did even 5 years ago. From permitting to labor rules, tax and regulatory compliance, do you believe that that perception is having real impact? And based on what you just said, that it is. And do you think that the legislature, in light of that, needs to rethink policy changes and how it affects employer confidence, both in terms of staying in Colorado and those looking to come here?
Yeah, and I'll just go back to what my previous answer was about the site selectors. You know, they did a briefing that they made that was specifically for legislators, and they were like, when we're looking at expanding to a state, here's what we're looking at. And zoning was a very big one, and the number one measurement that they used was from the time that we pick our site and we break the ground to when we are fully operating. And what one of the site selectors had mentioned is, you know, this company that he represented, he said for every month that we're not operating, we lose $40 million for that facility. And so when they're looking at states, and right now South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Pennsylvania, almost all eastern states and a lot of southeastern states are the ones who are frankly crushing it right now and getting all this business in Florida as well. They look at and they say, okay, we narrow it down to like 10 states. We visit most states. We narrow it down to, except for California. They've pretty much written off California, which I found very interesting. But so they narrow it down to like their top 10 states. And they go from the time we break ground to the time that we are operating, if it takes more than 6 months, then you get taken off the list pretty much automatically. And in a large part, that rules Colorado out. They specifically mentioned Denver because they're not just looking at states, they're also looking at the localities as well. And they said, I believe that they estimated the average from breaking ground to actually operating in Denver specifically was between 12 and 18 months. Now, if you're looking at expanding a really large corporation here and you go, you know, at $40 million loss per month that you're not open and operating, you can't afford 18 months not operating. And so, you know, Colorado, what they consistently said, and this was, I think, around 10 site selectors that represent very large businesses here, they just said, you know, Colorado is just not competitive in that sense. And energy policy, which we haven't talked much about energy except in the opening, energy policy was a major conversation that they had. And they were like, look, you know, with the certain laws that we already have on the books, plus some of the laws that they see get introduced, and thankfully, in my opinion, a lot of them never actually make it all the way through. But, you know, they see, even if it doesn't make it all the way through, maybe it's just a messaging bill, but guess what? That they're getting that message. They're receiving that message, and they're saying, well, hey, maybe next year it actually does pass. And so, you know, they look at the energy policy, because if you're going to build a huge 250,000 square foot facility here in Colorado, you're going to need a lot of energy, you know, to power that. And with what they've seen from the legislature on energy policy, they're really nervous. And so I think that is really kind of hampering the potential for bringing in more business in Colorado.
Next question is going to go to both of you. I'll start with you, Senator. So House Bill 1430 generated significant debate, in part because the legislature once again acted preemptively on a citizen-led ballot measure before voters have had the opportunity to weigh in. Supporters would say that the state budget and unintended consequences are critical, and critics will argue that it undercuts the intent of the initiative process by diminishing the practical effect of the successful measure. How do you respond to voters who might see this as the legislature stepping in to blunt or override a citizen initiative before the election has occurred?
Yeah, I think both of them are right. I do. I think that that both of those comments or viewpoints are correct. I think that House Bill 1430 and that initiative particularly is relatively unique, though. I think that there was a strong consensus of the impact that initiative was going to have on the state of Colorado, and specifically our budget. It doesn't mean that what that is going for and the intent of what they're trying to do behind the initiative isn't the right thing, though, because it is. We should be investing in our roads, and I'm a strong believer in that. And I'm also a strong believer in kind of where 1430 landed, which at the end of the day, and I'll be short, I'm sorry. So at the end of the day, I think the hope is that there is a commission that's going to be created out of this, and that we do have legitimate conversations and opportunity to figure out how do we invest more in our roads and how do we make sure those dollars are going to where they were initially intended to go. But yeah, it is a very tricky area, and I think that we have to be very careful as a legislature to make sure that we don't circumvent the intent of the voters or that we don't circumvent the voice of the voters. I think that this particular case is just extremely unique, and the consequences of it could have been so severe. And it wasn't just a small group of people that believe that. You could talk to the hospitals, you could talk to a number of even business community that also believe that. But I also believe that we should be giving space for real conversations, for real change on how we're funding transportation in this state. And my hope is that that's what happens from this.
Yeah, so the way I view this ballot initiative 175 and frankly some other ballot initiatives like we had truth in sentencing, we had the police funding, is I view it as the people are frustrated with the legislature and they're saying, we want you to prioritize roads, we want you to prioritize public safety, and maybe we feel like you're not doing that, and that's why we're going to go through this ballot initiative process. And so I always try to put it back on the legislature, which makes it kind of easy being in the minority. You can do that. But so I view the ballot initiative 175 for the roads as the people saying, we want you to prioritize this. This is a true story. I am not making this up. A couple of Thursdays ago, I was at an event and I was speaking about the roads, and I was speaking about 1430, and I was speaking about ballot initiative 175. It was at this great restaurant and bar called Ironworks. You may have heard of it. But I was speaking there, talking about the roads. I kid you not, I left that event and I was with the Assistant Minority Leader, Ty Winter. So he is my witness to this. And I was taking him back to the Capitol, and I was driving on Lincoln Street. And where Lincoln and 8th cross in Denver, I hit a pothole that was so massive, it blew out both tires on the driver's side of my vehicle. I'm not kidding you. After I just talked about how bad the roads were in Colorado. So a couple days later, because I was waiting for the tires to come in, I was taking an Uber from Colorado Springs to the Capitol. And my Uber driver I was riding with this Uber driver, and she was like, oh, you're going to the Capitol? And so naturally that brought up questions, and so we started talking, and I told her what I do. And I go, I basically gathered from her that she's a true unaffiliated voter. She is a swing voter. She's like, sometimes I vote Republican, sometimes I vote Democrat. It's whoever speaks to me. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting and good to hear. And I go, what is your number one issue? And she was like, the roads, right? That was her number one issue, were the roads. And being an Uber driver, that makes sense. But she actually had another full-time job, and she did Uber on the side to make extra income. But the roads were the number one issue. And she was like, I pay so much in taxes. What the hell is going on? Why are the roads so bad? And so when we talk about these ballot initiatives, to me, I view it as this is the people telling us, we want you to prioritize this. We want you to prioritize public safety, whether that's truth in sentencing and making sure people serve the largest part of the majority of their sentence, or we want better police funding, or we want you to put more towards the roads, or if it has to do with, there's some initiatives that have to do with schools and sports. This is the people telling us what to do, and so it's our job as legislators to listen to that and then say, okay, we're going to prioritize those things.
Well, we had a couple of other questions, but we're going to, and DJ's given me the time to open it up to you all. So first, I want to say thank you to both of you for your insights and for this conversation. And I want to open it up to conversations for questions that you all might have. DJ's in the back with the mic. We'd be happy to get it to you. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, both or either one of them individually, just raise your hand and we will get you a mic. And DJ is on his way up to you, sir.
I don't know if everyone heard, but the question was, what does pressure testing legislation means? And I think the most simple way is so the bills have to come through a committee before they make it to the floor. And so when we have a committee, whether it's, I serve on 3 different committees, transportation, finance, and I'm the chair of health committee, is that we dig in on those bills. So we make sure that there's not unintended consequences. We hear from stakeholders where there are concerns on a bill. We have that ability within the committee because because your vote depends on it, to make sure that that work is done, that bill gets to a space that you can support. And that's really that's a lot harder to do on the floor once it makes it out of a committee because of where the margins are, because of how it operates. But within the committee, where it's a smaller group of legislators who know more about that issue, whether it's healthcare or transportation or whether it's a finance issue, really allows for those deeper conversations to happen and really allows for the digging in of those bills and making sure that there aren't unintended consequences in those bills and that those bills are written in a way that do the most good. And I think that in the Senate, we're really lucky because I think the vast majority of the Senate Republicans, do a great job and are really easy to work with in regards to having those conversations and in regards to kind of digging in and building up that partnership, really to make sure good bills are coming out and that we're addressing issues that may be in a bill.
And Senator, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you brought that used that phrase, the pressure testing, it was in response to, when you have challenging budget years like we've had, that the fiscal note, regardless of size, is really meaningful, and it makes you really look. I mean, you can't just in good budget years, smaller bills with smaller fiscal notes can just you don't need to pay attention to. That might be the wrong way to say it, but there's not as much scrutiny around them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that even from a policy perspective, it's a big thing as well. I think that I don't want to overstate it, but when you are close to a supermajority, a lot of the fights don't happen with the other side. The fights are happening internally on your side. I've come up with a saying that we should be measuring our elected officials not with how they fight the other side. That's easy. It's, are you willing to stand up to your own side? Are you willing to stand up to your own side and say, hey, this is not all right? And there's people that are willing to do that. But you have to understand that's hard. Mm-hmm. That's hard because the other side's already trained not to like you. And then you have people on your side who are upset with you, and so you kind of put yourself on an island a little bit, But it's not just that; it's that policy. And when you are close to that supermajority, as the majority, you can pass anything, right? You don't need Republicans to pass anything. You can just pass it without them. But to stop bad policy, you usually do need to work with Republicans, and so. And so I think that when we look at that, it's not just a budget thing; it is a policy thing. And I think there is probably more. And no offense to the House, because I served in the House, but there's just more deliberation in the Senate, and things do move a little slower, and we do take our time of really digging in. And I think we have good senators on both sides of the aisle that are willing to do that. And like I said, really stand up to that measurement of are you willing to stand up to your own side and not just sit down there and fight the other side with all of your time.
Can I add to that as well? And I want to emphasize what Senator Mullica said, and always give credit where it's due. We saw a lot of potentially really bad pieces of legislation this year, in my opinion, really bad pieces of legislation not make it through committee. Because you had members of the majority party, actually stand up to their side and say, look, this is not just because we have the same letter next to our name and maybe agree a whole lot more than we disagree. We did see a few different bills, quite a few actually, that died in committee that had Democrat sponsors on it. When obviously they make up the majority of the committee, and they technically, just based on the parties, they had enough votes to pass it. But you did see you did see some of the Democrats break apart from their party in that sense and actually vote against their own members' bills, which I know is really hard to do because then, you feel the wrath of people who technically, are on your side, politically and ideologically. And so, I mean, it takes a lot. And so I give all the credit when I see that happen, because I know the amount of pressure that gets put on legislators when they do that, and from, different groups who, obviously often aren't happy about that when that happens. But I do think that's a big difference that you saw this year compared to last year, is you saw a lot more really bad pieces of legislation never make it out of committee, when I think had it been ran last year or in previous years, they would have passed, because there was a whole lot, what I felt like, more party line votes on legislation in previous years compared to this year.
You were all very polite about what I think is an important issue that maybe should be talked about. Ballot issue 175 wrought Bill 1430. Why was that? Senator Mullica, you were very nice. You said, well, it was a unique situation. The unique situation, I think, was the fiscal danger that could have come to the state because of ballot issue 175, which sounds like a wonderful thing. Fix our roads. Let's build more roads. Nobody wants potholes on 8th and Lincoln. Can you say something about the ballot initiative process, and how, which is obviously intended to be the people's voice, and that's a wonderful thing, about how sometimes it either unintentionally or perhaps intentionally has unintended consequences, or consequences not recognized by people signing petitions?
Yeah, I think that our democracy is always imperfect, and I think that when we look at that, there can be things that come up, and I was at Thornton Fest this last weekend, and it was just full of petition signers, and obviously some of those folks will say whatever they can to get you to sign their petition, and sometimes that's not the most honest thing that they're telling you. I think we have to tread very lightly, though, when it comes to the people's voice and giving them that ability. We have that ability as a legislature to put things on the ballot. I think that when we start stepping on those toes or limiting that ability, I think it gets really, really tricky, and I think we have to be really, really careful of what those conversations are. I will say that even with the critiques, and I think there's valid critiques, and issues, when we do look at 175, I had my own viewpoints, but there is positives that comes out of these things as well. It forces people to talk. I think that if it comes to fruition, I think there's a lot of harm that can come to our state from a budgetary standpoint. But like I said earlier, I don't think it's a bad thing that we should be talking about how do we improve our roads. And I hope that that's the outcome, and I think we have until the 15th to determine if that's going to be the path that they take. And I've heard positive things, but that's sometimes what comes out of this process, is that leverage and that forced conversation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we do have to kind of be shocked into place a little bit as elected officials to kind of make sure that we are focusing on the things that we should focus on. And you're right, the people of Colorado, they get that before them, and I think that that's something they want to see, and we should pay attention to that. And maybe 175 is not the right answer, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having a real conversation of kind of how we're funding roads and making sure that the dollars that are supposed to be going to fund roads aren't necessarily going to fund things that was not the intent for them to fund. And so yeah, do we maybe have conversations of what our initiative process looks like? I think maybe, but I also think that there can be good things that come out of it, even if the initiative doesn't go forward.
Yeah, I think we saw 1430 because it's obvious to everyone that if there is a initiative on the ballot in November to fix the damn roads, it's going to overwhelmingly pass. And so, I think that's where the preemption came from, because it's like it is one of the top issues for voters in Colorado. And I come back to, I feel like this is the voters telling us, you didn't fix this problem to begin with, and now we're at this point, like, fix the problem, and then we won't have to do these ballot initiatives, if you fix it ahead of time, because it wouldn't be such a popular ballot initiative if not for us having really bad roads. And so, I just come back to, I put it all back on the legislature. If I feel like if people felt like we were doing our job and meeting those needs and demands, then we wouldn't even be sitting here talking about a ballot initiative to fix the roads, because we did done fixed it already ourselves as a legislature.
We do have time for one final quick question. There's 3 hands up, so DJ gets to choose. Oh, he chose. Quick question.
Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Carly West with the American Petroleum Institute, and appreciate that you brought up energy, and just wanted to circle back on that. For those who are in the energy policy space, I think for a lot of years we've been seeing red flags when it comes to affordability and reliability, and it felt like this year there was a shift where that conversation spread to a lot more stakeholders and a lot more groups who engaged in real concerns around that. And I think we saw that result in a lot of really substantive discussion for the PUC sunset bill, and ultimately not seeing the clean energy plan bill even introduced in the first place. So would love your thoughts on, is this a real shift in how the legislature is looking at energy and reliability and affordability in Colorado, or was this year kind of a one-year blip and we'll go back to a lot of regulations coming forth?
Well, I can tell you that I won't be running any bills to like ban natural gas or anything. There was a bill that I don't even know if everybody in the room is aware was going to be a bill, and I'll take some credit on that on the House side, that we really put some pressure on and teamed up with labor and others to really put the pressure on the House and the Speaker to not bring forward a bill that was going to preempt a ballot initiative that I think will be very popular as well. And so, I hope that, what we saw this year with a lot more restraint on the legislature as far as going after oil and natural gas and a lot of the energy-related policies that we've seen in past years. I hope that's the norm going forward. Again, if you can talk about progress, but it's like, okay, but progress should be slow when you're talking about overhauling an entire industry or economy. And so I do want to see that slow growth. Again, going back to the site selectors, that was their big concern, is we don't know what your energy policies are going to be each January. You come back and meet, and that is really stifling and holding back investment in Colorado, because they're terrified of what the next session is going to bring. And so I hope to see a much more reasonable approach. The bill that I think it was Senate Bill 182, it started off as Senate Bill 22, which was the bipartisan bill to keep the Ray Nixon plant extended for another 3 years, that Colorado Springs utilities and environmentalist groups came to negotiation on. I think that was a big win and sent a sign that, hey, we obviously everybody wants a clean environment. Like, who doesn't? That would be a crazy thing for somebody to say, we don't want a clean environment. But we can do it in a pragmatic and smart way, and not just setting arbitrary deadlines. Because frankly, when I see 80% carbon emission reduction by 2030, when I see nice even numbers from politicians, I go, okay, that's arbitrary. That's not scientific. And I think that's what we're looking at. 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Like, scientifically, I don't think there's much science behind those nice even round numbers. And so, let's get there in a smart way that is not going to do it on the backs of the people of Colorado, who have to pay the rates for their utilities and other energy sources.
And I would say it's probably TBD. I think that what we saw this year is what partnership looks like. And I think that a partnership is a two-way street, and partnership is recognizing what role each party plays. And I think the oil and gas industry they play an important role in our state. They provide energy, they provide jobs. It's a huge part of our economy, and we should value that. And we should respect that, and we should try to do all that we can to help you succeed. With that, there's a two-way street, and that you should be able to have difficult conversations as well, and make sure that the industry is operating to the best of its ability, that our communities are safe, that our air is as clean as can be, that our water is safe and clean. And I think that we saw that, and I think we've seen partnership over the last several years. Whether it's Senator Roberts and Senator Marchman killing the bill in Ag Committee that was going to ban fracking, to the partnership around that we weren't going to see any bills because the industry, came to the table and was willing to help out with certain projects and with revenue for those projects. I think we've shown that can be successful over the last year. I think I say TBD because we have a new governor coming in. And I think that there's probably going to be a lot of testing of that governor and where he stands on, whoever that governor may be, where they stand on these issues. And I'm sure legislators are going to put legislation out that does, kind of test those waters and see where it's at. And so, but I do think that we have something to stand on over the last several years to show that a partnership can work with that industry, and hopefully we can build off of that, would be my hope.
I think Governor Kirkmeyer will be very,
oh boy, here we go. We made it to the end. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are done. So thank you.
I said I switched it.
Thank you to both of you for being here. Again, thank you all for your questions and participating. That wraps up the panel, so appreciate it. Next, I want to invite CSI Board Chairman Jack Graham to the podium to give us some final remarks.
Thanks, Dustin. First, I'd really like to express my appreciation to Senator Mullica and Representative Caldwell. It's so encouraging to see a couple of incredibly bright, emotionally mature individuals in our legislature, and I really, really appreciate the comments that you guys provided. I joined CSI 12 years ago. I was very attracted to the idea that public policy decisions should be made on the back of objective, fact-based information and data, and that public policy decisions should be as devoid of partisan politics as possible. That's perhaps a little bit too idealistic, but I'm very attracted to that idea. That's how we run our businesses, and that's the way we should run our government. Equally, the core cultural component of CSI, we as an organization have at our core the idea that we are nonpartisan, that we don't advocate, that we are there to put information into the marketplace, into the hands of legislators, into the hands of the media, and to the public so that they can make fact-based, objective decisions about public policy, be as well-informed as possible. So that's why I joined CSI. And I will tell you that our mission, our vision for CSI is evolving. Because at a level, you could think that all we're really interested in is getting information into the marketplace, and the results will be what they will be. Well, given what's going on in our state today, we're concerned. We're deeply concerned with what's going on in our state. And so we're evolving to the idea that we actually do care about results. We want to see different outcomes. I think if you look back at Paul and Dean's slide that shows what's happening with regard to jobs, that we're ranked 50th in the country in jobs and that we're losing jobs. And the same thing with businesses. We're ranked 48th. Can we put up that next slide? I don't want to get into the details here, but this is an indication of, these are what I call our KPIs, the key performance indicators for the state of Colorado. How are we doing with regard to energy, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, public safety, and the state budget? And it shows where we were ranked in 2011 and now where we're ranked in 2024. We're sliding in every single category. We've declined in our KPI, in our performance. We're doing less good than we were over 10 years ago. If we collectively were the board of the state of Colorado responsible for overseeing the operations of the state, and we were sitting there as board members, we would all be raising our hands and saying, alert. We got to get into the heads of the executive team and let them know that this is unacceptable. Something has to change. We need different outcomes. We need different results. That's the evolution that's taking place within CSI. We are still fully committed to nonpartisanship, to non-advocacy, but we've decided we really want to do everything we can in our power to drive results so that in every one of those categories, Colorado is ranked in the top quartile. We want to be the best run state in the nation. That's our vision for the state of Colorado. We're committed to it. So let me just move on to, skip that slide, let's go on to the next one. Here's some future events. Appreciate that you guys are here. You obviously care as much as we do, otherwise you wouldn't be here this morning, but really appreciate your participation. Future events in August 11th, Pints Policy and Common Sense. We're going to be getting into the ballot at that point in time. That'll be a feature conversation, and the same thing on September 8th. And then we have our Free Enterprise Summit every year in October, November. So we welcome you guys to attend that as well. One last slide, and then I'll get out of your way between you and the rest of your day. I don't want to be there. We always need money. This organization doesn't run on hope. It runs on the back of money. So if you're helping, thank you so much. If you're not helping, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you to see if you can do something to help us fund our treasury. So thank you all for attending this morning, and have a great day.